that made me think of the term chasing the dragon, which is when someone keeps returning to a substance, trying to recreate what it was like in the beginning, and yet it's impossible. So it's this never-ending chase that often does end. Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus by Mary Shelley, published in 1818, and I am comparing it with the new 2025 Guillermo del Toro adaptation. So I love the book Frankenstein. I've read it many times. The first time I read it for the story, but I've read it 4 or 5 times in total, and every time after that first time, there's always something new to pick up and something like a new way to interpret the story, and some of the ways people can interpret it were intended by Mary Shelley, and yet others, admittedly, it's probably something she hadn't meant when she wrote the book, and yet that's one of my favorite things about art, right? Is once it's out of the artist's hands, other people can make brand new interpretations and they make it their own and adopt it in a sense and apply to it a new meaning that the creator had not meant. And some people don't like this because they're like, hey, if that's not what the writer meant with the story, then you shouldn't be putting that on it. And yet I disagree. Again, I think that's the beautiful thing about artwork is once it's out in the world, it no longer belongs to the artist in a sense because we can all make of it what we will. And I love that personally. And honestly, that kind of is fitting with Frankenstein because when Victor was creating the creature, he had his own way of interpreting what he was doing and what he wanted from it. And yet, when it's alive and out in the world, it's doing things that he had not wanted and disagreed with, you know? So you could almost see it as representing art itself in a sense. But yeah, I love this book, as I have said, and when I heard that this adaptation was getting a limited theatrical release, also it's Guillermo del Toro, he's incredible, and he's doing Frankenstein, so I vowed to drive as far as necessary to make sure I was able to see this before it left theaters. And ultimately, I only had to drive 20 minutes away to go see it, which isn't too bad, but yeah, I'm so glad I got to see this on the big screen. And as far as my spoiler-free thoughts, so I went into this expecting a faithful adaptation. I didn't watch any trailers or anything ahead of time. I knew, of course, that Oscar Isaac, who plays Victor, he's older than book Victor was, and yet even so, I don't know why, but I went into this thinking it would be very faithful. And yet, within the first 5 to 10 minutes, I realized that I needed to recalibrate my expectations because they make it very clear almost right away that this isn't going to be exactly like the book because this isn't a spoiler because again it's like the first 5 minutes. We see the creature very soon and he's roaring and he has this superhuman strength, and so I was confused at the beginning as to what they were doing with the creature. And so, yeah, ultimately, this isn't like a totally unfaithful adaptation, of course, and it's more faithful than some movies that have been done. And yet it is a new interpretation of it, and there are significant changes that were made. So I think if you are a book purist, you will be very annoyed and have a lot of complaints with what he is doing with the story. And yet, I think if you are open to seeing a new version of this timeless tale, then I think you should check this out, and I think you would like it. And as always can be expected with any Del Toro movie, the costumes, the sets, the visuals, the atmosphere is incredible. I just wanted to walk into this movie because it was so gorgeous. And also, per usual, when it comes to Del Toro, there is some violence and gore that is going to make you wince. At least it did me. We see violence towards people, towards wolves. If you're sensitive towards animal violence, there's some scenes with wolves that was pretty grisly. And then also he does not shy away from the fact that Frankenstein, he is putting together this creature using a variety of dead body parts, which is so gross when you think about it. And it's funny in the book because she will often use euphemisms and being like, I put the relics of my experiment into a basket. And she's talking about filling a basket. I'm saying she because Mary Shelley, but Victor, he's talking about filling a basket of body parts, right? And so using these other ways to phrase it makes it seem not quite as bad. But this movie definitely does not shy away from showing lots of body parts. And then again, the full title of this book is Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. And so we do get references to the Prometheus story in this movie. And also, the first time we see the creature, he looks like the creature in the movie Prometheus from the Alien franchise. So I wonder if that was intentional. Although I read that once the creature has been alive a bit longer, they based his appearance off of the drawings by Bernie Wrightson. So his illustrations are in this book right here. I will include them throughout this video, but they are absolutely stunning, so beautiful. And also, this is just the way he is also described in the book. So a lot of these illustrations, this is my Easton Press Deluxe Edition, which also has gorgeous drawings. So all of them kind of have the creature looking the way Jacob Elordi looks. So he is true to the book in his appearance. By the way, I obviously have multiple Frankenstein editions. This is Folio Society, also has gorgeous drawings. This one doesn't have illustrations, but it's just a fun cover. And then I also love the tagline for this movie, "Only monsters play God." And it's funny because oftentimes, stereotypically, people call the green monster with the bolts, they'll call him Frankenstein. And book readers will be like, actually, Frankenstein is the scientist and the monster has no name. But also, if you've read the book, Victor is the monster here, right? And so I like that this movie showcases that, who the monster really is. And yet at the same time, as I'll get into in the spoiler section, maybe sometimes I wish they went about it in a more subtle way. Not subtle, I don't know. Like we have characters straight up say, only monsters play God and you're a monster. And rather than having characters say this, I guess I just wanted it seen through his actions, right? And not have characters actually say the words. But anyway, I do love that tagline. But I would recommend this movie. Again, do not go into it expecting something super faithful. If you want to watch a more faithful version, I personally love the Kenneth Branagh, Robert De Niro, Helena Bonham Carter adaptation from the 90s. It gets a lot of hate, and yet I think it's fantastic. Like, yes, it's over the top and dramatic, but in the book, the characters are very dramatic. And so the movie adapting it in that way is quite fitting. But yeah, if you want something faithful, I personally love the Kenneth Branagh movie. Again, there's also been literally hundreds of adaptations of this. And so I am glad that Del Toro is doing something different because the story has been told so many times. And so yeah, anyway, comment your favorite Frankenstein adaptation down below. And from here on out, I will now get into the details of the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. So in the movie, Victor is raised by a cruel father, but a mother he loves. However, she dies in childbirth when he's about 10 or so, maybe older. By the way, the actor playing young Victor is the same kid from The Monkey, who was fantastic in The Monkey, and I thought he was very good here as well. But the baby she was giving birth to when she dies was a little boy named William, and William ends up being the father's favorite child, and he spoils William, whereas he's very harsh with Victor. And then ultimately the father ends up dying, and so then Victor and William are raised by two different family members. And we then flash forward a number of years, and Victor speaks publicly about how he is trying to reanimate dead bodies, and he ends up getting kicked out of school. But this rich former doctor named Harlander, who is played by Christoph Waltz, he now has money from weapons, and he tells Victor that he wants to fund this project. And so it's interesting to think that the creature was made from the profits of war and violence. Not only that, but also the body parts, a lot of them come from a battlefield, like the remains left after a battle has been fought because there is a war going on. And this guy, Harlander, or Christoph, as I'm just going to call him Christoph, but he knows William because William is engaged to Christoph's niece, a woman named Elizabeth. And so when Victor agrees to work with this guy and have him fund the project, they decide that William will be Victor's assistant. And so the Christoph character, William, and Elizabeth, they all know what Victor is working on. And he has made his desires very public, right? He gave this presentation in front of a whole group. So a lot of people know what he's doing. And while working on this, Victor is also getting to know William's fiancée, Elizabeth. And they have an almost enemies to lovers thing going on because she dislikes him in the beginning initially. However, over time, they do form a bond. But then when he makes advances towards her, she tells him like, hey, I've made my choice. I'm going to marry William. This cannot happen between us. And she runs out of the room. Whereas in the book, Victor is raised by two parents who love him and spoil him, and they dote on him, and they're very wealthy. They're very loving. Totally different from the movie. And one day his mother, so she comes from humble backgrounds, and so she likes to be very charitable and help the poor since she was once poor. And so she is going to help this family, and she sees that they have a little girl, and the mother takes an interest in this little girl, and she has always wanted a daughter but has never had one of her own. And so she offers to adopt this little girl. And we find out that she isn't blood related to this family she lives with, and it was just unfortunate events which led her to be their charge. And this girl's name is Elizabeth, and Victor is very protective of her, and they are raised together. And when the mother dies at a young age from scarlet fever, she makes it known to them that she wants them to marry one day, which both are on board with because he and Elizabeth love each other. Though to be honest, the book doesn't do a great job at developing her character and their relationship, aside from just showing her as a kind, compassionate person, and they were raised together starting at a young age. Obviously, it's kind of weird because they're step siblings, but yeah, anyway, we don't get a ton of time in learning more about her, but ultimately, I guess we learn as much as we need to know. And he has a younger brother named William in this version as well. And once again, there is a significant age gap between the two because this story takes place, once he starts building the creature. Victor is a young adult. He's in college, whereas William is a young boy. So we never see William into adulthood because the story takes place when both are younger, whereas the new movie takes place when Victor is older. And so therefore, we see William grow to be a young man. And in the book, as he starts working to reanimate this dead body, he does so using his own learning and the money that comes from his family, and he has no help at all, and he tells no one of what he is doing. And I know in other versions, we have him telling others about his endeavors and having at least one helper, but I do like in the book that he is doing this on his own. And the fact that this is his, deep, dark secret, he feels he can tell no one, adds an interesting layer to the story. And I love the quote, "You're only as sick as your secrets." And so we see how sick Victor is because he won't tell anyone what is going on. And as I will talk about a bit later, this aspect is also very much like addiction because, his obsession with this project and the solitary nature of it and how it consumes him is very much like an addiction. And granted, not all addictions are solitary. I recently covered Requiem for a Dream. That's about a group of friends who are heroin addicts. And yet at the end of the day, addiction ruins your relationships, and it does end up being something kind of solitary. And even in Requiem, they end up keeping secrets from each other and not telling the other how much drugs they're actually doing. So at the end of the day, yeah, addiction is just a very secretive, solitary thing in many ways. And I want to share a section of this book which exactly describes an addict in so many ways. And now every day showed me more plainly how well I had succeeded. But my enthusiasm was checked by my anxiety, and I appeared rather like one doomed by slavery to toil in the mines or any other unwholesome trade than an artist occupied by his favorite employment. Every night I was oppressed by a slow fear, and I became nervous to a most painful degree. The fall of a leaf startled me, and I shunned my fellow creatures as if I had been guilty of a crime. Sometimes I grew alarmed at the wreck I perceived that I had become. The energy of my purpose alone sustained me. My labors would soon end, and I believed that exercise and amusement would then drive away incipient disease, and I promised myself both of these when my creation should be complete. And like I said, I will return to this theme of addiction again after I have wrapped up the plot. But so eventually in the movie, Victor, he realizes the time is right, a storm is happening, the body is ready, and it's time to do this thing. And so he goes to Christoph and he tells him that it's time to do this. And Christoph, this is when he reveals that he is dying of syphilis. And the reason he funded this project is because he views this as Victor as having the key to immortal life, basically. And so he's like, I want you to use my body, which I was a little confused by. Like, he's just been spending this whole time making a body, and now Christoph is like, oh, I want you to use me? I guess he thought it would give him immortality. But Victor is like, no, like, you're sick. That disease is so embedded within you. Like, I can't use your body. You're too sick, so no. And so they argue about this, and ultimately Christoph falls and dies. And it almost felt like Del Toro just had no more use for this character from here on out, and so they gave him syphilis and killed him. But why include him in the first place? If you need a source of Victor's funds, just make the money come from his family, like it did in the book. If you need someone to introduce him to Elizabeth, William is engaged to Elizabeth, so there you go. And also, he does mess up the machine to create the creature, but it's not the end of the world, and the machine still works and everything still goes as planned. So I feel like with this character, either give him more to do, give him more purpose, or just not have him at all. Like, the fact that he dies so early made me question what the point of his character was at all. And I will be talking about him a bit more later in the video and some key scenes with him. And yet, even so, I feel like he almost could have been cut from the movie. Also, I thought maybe like, oh, they're going to say that because he died right before the creature is born, they were going to imply that his soul is in the creature's body now. But I don't think that's what they were going for. So I really don't understand the point of his character in many ways. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments if you feel differently, but I feel like he didn't serve a great enough purpose and he could have been cut. But anyway, in the movie, he does the electricity thing, which is not from the book, actually. In the book, no details are given as to how he brings this being to life. And I kind of love that Shelley doesn't even attempt to create any kind of logic as to how he's able to do this. The only detail we are given is that he will use large body parts because it's easier to work with large pieces than small. And Jacob Elordi, who plays the creature, is 6'5", and Oscar Isaac is 5'9". That height difference right there works really well to showcase the size of this being. But anyway, so he goes through it all and it seems to not have worked. So then he goes to bed, disappointed. However, he awakes to see the creature standing there in his room and he is very excited and he's talking to it and they touch hands. And then he opens the drapes and sunshine comes in. And at first the creature is like recoiling from the sun. And Victor is like, no, sun is life, sun is good. And so then the creature mimics Victor in soaking up the sunlight. And from here, he gently guides the creature down into the basement where he then locks him up. And he's doing it very gently, granted. But yeah, we then hear in voiceover how he's like, wow, like as soon as I saw him alive, I regretted what I had done. And this is true to the book to some extent as well, because he sees the creature open its eye. And as soon as that happens, he's like, I have made a huge mistake. What did I do? And he says how when he was putting this together, he chose features that he found attractive and he thought this was a beautiful being. And yet, the instant it shows signs of life, he is disgusted and horrified by it. And in the book we read, the different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with that ardor that far exceeded moderation. But now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. But he eventually does fall asleep, but he wakes up to see the creature right there in his bedroom. And in the book, he's horrified and he runs out of the building and he just wanders the streets for a while before his friend Henry Clerval comes upon him. By the way, there is no Henry Clerval in the movie. But yeah, his friend Henry comes upon him and he's like, hey, I haven't seen you for ages. Let's go back to your place. And so as they go back to Frankenstein's place, he's very cautious, being like, is it still here? And ultimately, the thing is gone. And he is like, wow, that was a close one. And just how irresponsible, right? Like he just created this new being, gave life to this creature. He has no idea what it's capable of. He himself is horrified by it. And yet in the movie, it's messed up. He chains him up. And yet at the same time, like at least he was taking some kind of responsibility. Whereas in the book, he's like, well, out of sight, out of mind. It's not my responsibility anymore. Hopefully nothing bad happens. And he just tries to put it out of his mind. So the fact that he comes from such a rich, spoiled background, and then the minute he creates life, he realizes like, oh, I can't handle this. And he just abandons it. Again, it just shows how immature, irresponsible, and he's just like a spoiled brat who's used to getting away with whatever and never having to take on more than he wants. And it's just so frustrating the way he acts. And by the way, even though I dislike the character of Victor, and also the creature does a lot of unlikable things in the book too. And yet at the same time, this is an example of how you can write unlikable characters. Like, you're not writing about good people, and yet the story is good, and it makes you want to keep reading. Like, characters don't need to be good for it to be a good book. But it's also interesting to wonder if the creature has a soul. And in the movie, when William sees the finished product, he says something to Victor being like, did you ever consider what part of the human body contains the soul? Like, did you even consider that? And Victor says, no, I didn't. Also, by the way, William, he was helping. He was like a very crucial part helping with this project. So he was enabling this. And yet now he's like, did you even consider? But then it's interesting to wonder if Victor, maybe he gave part of his soul to the creature. And so the creature is just an extension of himself, which again is like addiction, because who you are when you are under the influence in many ways is the worst part of yourself, but it is still yourself. And at one point we read, I considered the being whom I had cast among mankind and endowed with the will and power to effect purposes of horror, such as the deed which he had now done, nearly in the light of my own vampire, my own spirit let loose from the grave and forced to destroy all that was dear to me. So yeah, just like this alter ego version of yourself that sabotages your life, right? That's what the creature does in many ways. And that's also what addiction does to a person's life. But in the movie, so he has made the creature and several weeks have passed and he keeps him locked up in the basement primarily. And he's trying to teach it to talk, but all it says is Victor. And so Frankenstein, he already regretted it right away, but as time goes on, he's just filled with resentment towards having to care for this thing and the fact that it doesn't seem very smart. And so he gets very mean and abusive to it, being like, you're such an idiot. Like, don't you have any thoughts in your head? You're so dumb. And again, a few weeks have passed and we cut to Elizabeth and William, and Elizabeth is like, man, we haven't heard from my uncle or Victor in a long time, so we should go check on them. And also when Frankenstein welcomes them when they first show up, I thought that was a great scene because he's trying to act normal and like he's just excited to see them, but he's got these crazy eyes going on and is acting kind of manic. And so yeah, I just thought that was a great scene right there. And when they show up, Elizabeth hears something in the basement, so she goes down there by herself and she sees the creature and they have a touching, literally and figuratively moment. And she then runs upstairs and Victor tells her like, yeah, that being is indeed what he had reanimated. And so they go down there together and Elizabeth chastises Victor for the way he has been mistreating the creature. And that night she goes down yet again to see the creature and they share a sweet moment and the creature is now able to say her name as well, despite the fact that he will say nothing else but Victor when he's around Victor. And honestly, the first time they interact, it didn't make me cry, but it did make me feel very emotional because it was just such a sweet, tender moment. And I thought, both actors were amazing. Jacob Elordi is fantastic as the creature. Mia Goth, this was my first time watching anything with her. And I thought she was good. And this scene, especially, like, you just feel the compassion within her and you feel it coming from her, but you also feel how much the creature is needing this kind of patience and compassion and care and how he is not getting that from Victor, right? And so, yeah, it's just a beautiful moment. And it makes you wonder, if only the creature was treated in this way throughout his whole time right from the start, what could have been? And you wonder that in the book too. But in the book, the creature has no kindness at all towards him. Well, he has the blind old man, which I'll get to, but yeah, getting these glimpses of him being treated well, it's almost all the more painful. So after this, Elizabeth and William, they leave the next day and Elizabeth quickly is like, we need to turn this carriage around. I feel like something bad is going to happen. And something bad does happen because Victor decides he is going to burn the place down with the creature inside. However, in the process, he messes up his leg and it has to be amputated, which is not in the book. And the creature is able to get loose out of its bonds and it goes down the sewer thing basically into safety. And from here in the movie, the creature finds a house in a wooded area, and he helps the family living there. And through them teaching a young girl how to read, he is also able to learn. And he also sees wolves attacking this family's sheep, and the people shoot the wolves, but it makes him realize that things attack and hurt each other, not out of hate, but because that's just the way it is. And eventually this family leaves for a bit, but the blind grandfather stays behind. And so this is when the creature approaches the blind man, and the family is gone for a good chunk of time. So he gets a lot of time with this old man, and he is shown kindness, and he is able to read so much more. However, eventually the old man is killed by wolves, and as he is dying, that's when the family returns, and they assume the creature is who killed him. And so they then try to shoot and kill the creature. But, by the way, I forgot to mention, Victor sees early on that the creature heals rapidly. He's basically like Wolverine. And so these people shoot him, and he does fall and appear dead. However, eventually his body rejuvenates, and he gets up and goes on his way. And so, yeah, this aspect, again, he has like super strength, plus he heals rapidly. And so these they're like superhero-ifying the monster of Frankenstein. And I'm not sure how much I like those details, but that is what we get here, where he can't die. His body will just heal up right away. But also, when he had been with the blind old man, he took a brief trip to go see the ruins of the building where he was created. And he finds amongst the ruins like photographs and diaries, and that's how he learns how he was made. And he also sees a letter containing Victor's name and home address. So now he knows where to find him. So after this family shoots him, he then makes his way to Victor. Also, one thing I wanted to mention in the movie is I love how we see how connected to nature the creature is. And he has that moment right away with a deer where he's like eating berries with it, and they're having this moment of connection in nature. But then humans interrupt it by shooting the deer. And so I thought that was a great scene. And then seeing how he is with the mice and the rats, and they're all comfortable crawling all over him. And so in the book, the creature comes across like, he's a sin against nature kind of a thing. Whereas here, we see how he's at peace with nature, and nature is totally fine with him. It's people, and not even all people. It's just some people are quick to judge, So yeah, that was another interesting take on the story. But in the book, when the creature had left Victor's home right at the beginning, he had taken a cloak with him that belonged to Victor. And inside this cloak is a diary with Victor's name and details of how the creature was made. And so, once again, he's in the woods. He comes across a home with a family. Through them teaching someone else, he then is able to learn how to read. And so he's able to read this diary and learn of his maker and how he was made. And once again, he tries to reach out to the blind man who lives with these people. However, in the book, the family members were just gone briefly. And so the creature talks to the blind man, trying to convey his situation, being like, hey, I have these people that I want to be friends with, and they're wonderful people, and yet I feel they won't accept me. I'm worried because of my looks. And the blind man tries to assure him, you'll be fine. I'm sure they're good people. However, the family comes back so soon that the creature hasn't had enough time to talk to the man. And ultimately, when the family shows up and they see the creature, they freak out. And so the creature runs off. And when he returns the next day, he sees that the family has moved out. That's how scared they were. And then from here, he saves a child from drowning. However, the father, as soon as he sees the creature, he freaks out and he shoots the creature. However, this does not kill him. Not in a superhuman kind of way, just because he's just able to heal from it. And then in the book, he reaches the area where Victor is from, and he happens to come across William, Victor's younger brother. And the creature kills William, and then he plants evidence on a woman named Justine, who is a close family friend. And so then she gets arrested for the murder of William, and ultimately she is executed. And Victor knows who is truly to blame, and he later is able to meet up with the creature, and the creature makes the demand for Victor to build him a female companion. And he says, if you do that for me, I will leave you alone. We will go live in the forest. Also, the creature is a vegan. He doesn't need meat to survive. He's like, I can just survive on berries and nuts. We won't hurt anything or anyone. We will live peacefully. So just do this for me and you'll be safe. And so Victor feels like he has no option but to agree. However, while he is working on this, partway through, he realizes what a mistake this is, and who knows what this woman will be like and what she will want. And the creature can't make promises for what she will do or won't do because she's going to have a will of her own. And he's like, 1, who knows? She could be crazy violent. 2, she could be disgusted by the creature. What if she doesn't even want to be with him? And another thing, what if they procreate and then they spawn all of these undead weird beings? And so he realizes, like, there's too many ways in which this could go bad. So he destroys what he has been working on so far, and the creature sees this, and in retaliation, he kills Henry Clerval. And also he told Victor that if he did not make him a companion, he would be with Victor on his wedding night. And so when Victor and Elizabeth get married, the creature shows up and he kills Elizabeth. And Victor, being the self-centered man that he was only concerned about himself, because when the creature said that, Victor was like, oh, well, he just means me, obviously, because everything is about me. And so he is shocked when the creature actually kills Elizabeth. And so from here, Victor vows to chase the monster down until one or both of them die. And also, by the way, the creation of the creature led to the death of 5 people in Victor's life. His father dies of natural causes, but what spurs on the heart attack or whatever is just all of the death and tragedy that has been going on in such a short time frame causes his father to also die. But then with the movie, so it is William and Elizabeth's wedding day, and we see that Elizabeth still hates Victor for what he had done to the creature. And then the creature shows up and tells Victor he needs to make him a companion. And Victor says no right off the bat. And so the creature starts flinging him around, and hearing all of the commotion, Elizabeth runs in and is thrilled to see the creature. And I had thought she just cared about the creature in just a kindly way, like she just cares about his well-being. But in this moment, we realize that she was in love with him. And Victor then tries to shoot the creature, but she steps in front of the bullet. She dies instead. And then the creature picks her up and she's like, take me with you, take me to where you live. And so he takes her into a cave, and there as she lies dying, she's like, I was lost, but then I was found when I met you, and that's what true love is, and now I found it, and yet now I must die. And so her being straight up in love with the creature was also something I had not expected. I guess I have mixed feelings on it, but it's not out of the norm for Guillermo del Toro to write a female character with a strange love interest, so it's also kind of normal for him to some extent. But anyway, from here, like the book, Victor chases the monster down to the depths of the North Pole, where a ship is sailing in an effort to discover the North Pole for themselves. And so this book and movie is bookended by this story up at the North Pole, because we start the story with this captain of a ship who, again, is on this mission to great discoveries, but their ship gets stuck in the ice, and they see Frankenstein, who is sick and on the verge of death, and they bring him in, and then he is telling the captain his story, and that is what we are reading. And then we end returning back to them on the ship. And so this movie is the same. But in the beginning section in both, the reason Frankenstein tells his story, I mean, it's a little different actually now that I think about it. But in the book, the reason he tells the captain his story is because he sees he and the captain are kindred spirits. They're both educated men, so the captain takes an instant liking to Frankenstein because he sees how smart he is. But Frankenstein is like, I can see we share the same sickness because we both have obsessions that rule our lives and that can ruin our lives. And so he's like, I'm going to tell you a little story that might make you rethink things. And so that is why he tells him this story. And by the time he is done, Frankenstein dies, and right as he dies, the creature shows up on the ship, and he is mourning the loss of Frankenstein as well, and the captain, he gets mad at the creature, and we read, this is from the captain's perspective. I was at first touched by the expressions of his misery, yet as I called to mind what Frankenstein had said of his powers of eloquence and persuasion, and when I again cast my eyes on the lifeless form of my friend, indignation was rekindled within me. Wretch, I said, it is well that you come here to whine over the desolation that you have made. You throw a torch into a pile of buildings, and when they are consumed, you sit among the ruins and lament the fall. Hypocritical fiend! If he whom you mourn still lived, still would he be the object. Again would he become the prey of your accursed vengeance. But, are you serious right now? Did you not just hear the story Frankenstein told you, and yet you still have the audacity to act like the monster is to blame. Also, he tells the creature, like, hey, if you used your conscience, you would know that what you were doing was wrong. Did you miss how he was created? Did you miss what his whole life has been up until this point? Granted, he and Frankenstein are birds of a feather, so it makes sense he is still on Victor's side despite everything. But yeah, so from here, the creature tries to explain himself a bit, and then he says that he is now going to kill himself, and we read, "He is dead who called me into being, and when I shall be no more, the very remembrance of us both will speedily vanish. I shall no longer see the sun or stars or feel the winds play on my cheeks. Light, feeling, and sense will pass away, and in this condition must I find my happiness. Some years ago, when the images which this world affords first opened upon me, when I felt the cheering warmth of summer and heard the rustling of the leaves and the warbling of the birds, and these were all to me, I should have wept to die. Now it is my only consolation. Polluted by crimes and torn by the bitterest remorse, where can I find rest but in death?" And then the captain, having heard this whole story, abandons his foolish, deadly, prideful endeavor, and he has them turn the ship around and go home. Whereas in the movie, the beginning is different because they find an injured Frankenstein and they take him aboard, and the creature shows up right away. And they try to kill him, but again, he cannot die, and so it's to no avail. And ultimately, they think they have drowned him, but of course he returns. However, because the water takes him far away, it takes him a while to get back to the ship, and this gives Frankenstein enough time to explain what's going on to the captain. And partway through the story, the creature shows up, and he's like, you know what, you've been hearing Frankenstein's story? Well, now it's time for me to tell you it from my perspective. And then by the time the creature is done telling his side of the story, Victor Frankenstein apologizes, and he calls him son, and he begs for forgiveness from the creature. And in this moment, the creature tells him, like, you have cursed me to a never-ending life because I cannot die. And Frankenstein tries to inspire him a bit, and he's like, well, if you have to live, then live, damn it. Make the most of your life. And from here, yeah, the creature forgives Frankenstein, and Frankenstein dies. And then the creature walks out off of the boat. Also, he helps release the boat from the ice. And then he walks off into the sunshine, which is reminiscent to the first positive interaction they had when Victor told him, like, oh, embrace the sun, like the sun is life. And so that is what we see the monster doing as he walks off in the end to live an eternal life. And also, again, the captain decides to cancel his prideful mission and turn back and go home. And as far as Victor and the monster, the creature, go in the end, I found this a bit cheesy. I also was just so surprised. I had not expected this. And this movie, in some ways, it's showcasing what a monster Victor is, and yet it's also providing him with this absolution in the end, right? Because he has the humility to be like, wow, like, this is all my fault. And he apologizes. Book Victor, he never apologized to the creature, right? Like, that seemed very out of character. And so, yeah, it was just a bit too sappy for my taste. Like, I can appreciate that Del Toro wanted to make this a story of someone who had no example of a good father. And so he, therefore, was a cruel, quote-unquote, father to this being he had created. And yet, unlike his own father, he regrets the way he has treated the creature. And so in the end, he tries to make things right. After fighting it for so long, right, he finally accepts what he has done and tries to make amends before he dies. But then, yeah, the fact that the creature is just going to live forever, I wasn't expecting that either. And it made me wonder, like, now that he's trying to live a better life and really make the most of life and live, laugh, love, that's the message Frankenstein left him with. And so I'm just like, what? So what's he going to do now? Like, I guess he could make it in the world despite his appearance. But my husband joked that as the centuries went on, the monster, the creature, went on to be a self-help guru, writing different books and giving TED Talks on how to get over your daddy issues and to embrace your identity and who you are and battling your inner demons and coming out on top. So I think that's funny to think about. But then to talk about the Prometheus aspect. So Prometheus is a god who created humans and also gave them fire, which might be literal, but also symbolic for knowledge. But he gives this to them to help them live. But then he is punished by Hercules, and he is tied to a rock where an eagle shows up every day to eat his liver. But then his liver regrows in the night, and so an eagle shows up every day to eat his liver. So he is cursed to a life of eternal suffering and torment. And so there is a part when the Christoph character calls Victor Prometheus, and then when he is saying, like, I want you to use my body, he says, I want to be the eagle that feasts on your liver. And so on one hand, I can appreciate that they're making the Prometheus connection, and yet it almost, again, was a bit too exact. I almost would have rather have seen this displayed in action, not through the dialogue being so explicit about it. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too nitpicky, but it felt... I mean, I guess it's fine. And most people don't even know the Prometheus connection. Most people don't know that's the full title of the book. And so I like that it's included because book readers will know. But yeah, anyway, let me know your thoughts on that down below. And because Victor gives life, but then he is punished for it, especially in the book, by living a life of suffering. And believe me, Victor is making the most of showing how much he is suffering in the book. He is constantly having one giant pity party after the other. No matter what anyone else is going through, he makes it all about himself. Like literally, a woman is on death row, about to be killed for a crime she did not commit. And he has the audacity to be like, well, as much as she was suffering, I was suffering so much more. Like, shut up. It's so frustrating. But then also, once the creature shows up, the creature tries to be like, no, like I'm the one who suffered more. I'm the one who's had more agony. And so they're constantly in a competition to decide who has suffered more. But because the story of Prometheus is about someone who is punished to eternal suffering, the fact that in the movie, the creature will live forever, it's almost like he is the Prometheus who is cursed to constant suffering. And also Prometheus's liver rejuvenates. And that's what happens with the creature as well, right? Like his body rejuvenates and so he can't die. And so his suffering is just eternal. And yet the catharsis he gets with Frankenstein in the end maybe helps him to end the torment, and he can now find a way to live a happier life, perhaps. And he finally is rescued from that rock and can live a good life and no longer needs to suffer. And so in many ways, they're both kind of Prometheus. Also, speaking of Prometheus, the Alien movie, a theme in that movie is a creator giving life and then regretting it. And so obviously, I think that's such a fascinating theme for one. But obviously we see that here, where Frankenstein instantly regrets creating this being. And also it's interesting because he's a man. And granted, a man is integral in the creation of life, right? But it is the woman's body who actually does the creating. And so it's funny that you have a man who wants to be the one to create life. And yet in the book, the instant the life is born, he's like, no, I can't handle this. I can't do this. This was a huge mistake. And so I just find that ironic. Like it doesn't say he's jealous of women, and I'm not saying that's the case, but he wants to be able to give life. And yet the minute he does, he's an immature jerk who can't handle the responsibility. But to circle back to addiction. So as horrible things are happening, which Victor is to blame, he is very self-centered about it all, like I said, and he's just in constant misery, but he's also squeezing the misery for all it's worth. And even though he caused these bad events and other people are suffering, he's just so self-centered about it. And that is also kind of similar to addicts. When they're in the midst of their addiction, they can be pretty self-centered. But then also in the end, when the creature shows up, the captain, again, he's like hating on the creature, saying what a horrible person he is. And the creature stops him, being like, hey, whatever negative thing you have to say to me, I've already thought of myself. Like, as much as you despise me, it's not possible for you to despise me more than I despise myself. And this also is similar to addiction because a lot of addicts have self-loathing. And that self-loathing, that negativity in their head is kind of what keeps them in the cycle of addiction. And despite the creature hating what he's doing it anyway. And it's like he can't help himself almost, kind of like an addict. And in the book, the creature tells the captain, "For while I destroyed his hopes, I did not satisfy my own. They were forever ardent and craving." So he's acting in these ways that repulse even himself, and yet it's to no avail, because ultimately His cravings are insatiable. And that's much like addiction, right? There's that phrase, 1 drink is too many and 1,000 isn't enough. And then also when Victor goes to build the woman before then stopping, that could be seen as relapsing in a sense, and how he isolates himself, his erratic behaviors, his emotional swings. He also goes to prison after the murder of Clerval, and he's determined innocent, but while in the jail, he gets sick and he's like ranting and raving, and he's saying how he's to blame for these deaths, and his father has to come and help like nurse him back to health, and that's kind of like a rehab. You know, when you first show up to a rehab, if you're having to detox and get off the substance, then yeah, it's not pleasant. And there are a lot of rantings and ravings that happen. And then in the end, when he vows to chase the creature down until one or both of them die, that made me think of the term chasing the dragon, which is when someone keeps returning to a substance, trying to recreate what it was like in the beginning. And yet it's impossible. So it's this never-ending chase that often does end in their death. I mean, not often, but plenty of people do die from drug overdose and things, and it's because they're trying to chase that high. And so, yeah, this time around, again, I just covered Requiem, and I'm also reading another book about a gambler who's addicted to gambling, and so addiction is just on my mind. And I have personal connection to addiction as well, so it's just something I find interesting to read about, and so I think that's an interesting way to view this story. But of course, other themes in this book include the dangers of pride. When you have a one-track mind and you put your pursuits before everything else, and the dangers and the death and the destruction that can cause. And I talked about this in my older Frankenstein video, but Shelley's father was a prominent philosophical thinker and writer. So she was closely connected to someone who was interested in the advancement of knowledge. And so it's interesting that she's choosing to write this cautionary tale. But in the book, a great section I want to read that focuses on this, we read, "A human being in perfection ought always to preserve a calm and peaceful mind and never to allow passion or transitory desire to disturb his tranquility. I do not think that the pursuit of knowledge is an exception to this rule. If the study to which you apply yourself has a tendency to weaken your affections and to destroy your taste for those simple pleasures in which no alloy can possibly mix, then that study is certainly unlawful, that is to say, not befitting the human mind. If this rule were always observed, if no man allowed any pursuit whatsoever to interfere with the tranquility of his domestic affections, Greece had not been enslaved, Caesar would have spared his country, America would have been discovered more gradually, and the empires of Mexico and the Peru had not been destroyed." And also in the movie, I love how we get the visual where the creature, when he's being made, he's up on this cross type thing, and we see Frankenstein looking to him, and it shows how this is his god, right? This is his idol now. And so I thought that was just a great visual. And then regret is also a theme that shows up in multiple characters in the movie. So Frankenstein regrets creating the creature, and so he uses violence to try to be rid of it and not accept what has happened in a way. And then he later, in the end, regrets how he treated the creature. And this is when he stops fighting and instead apologizes and accepts what has happened and seeks forgiveness. By the way, in the book, one of the first times he meets the creature, he wants to fight and like use violence to get this sorted. And the creature is the one that's like, hey, hold up, let's use our words. And so it's funny how Frankenstein is the one who's always wanting to resort to violence. And of course, the creature himself does eventually resort to violence too. But it's also interesting. We get that great line where this is in both book and movie. If I cannot inspire love, I will cause fear. And so we especially see that in the book, right? Because people treat him so horribly. He never gets any kindness, and people are calling him a monster. And so he's like, fine, you think I'm a monster? That's what I'll be, a monster. Whereas in the movie, that really wasn't the case, because he really wasn't that monstrous in the movie. He never kills... he kills people out of self-defense, like on the ship, but he never kills anyone connected to Victor's family. And yeah, so anyway, some significant changes. They've tried to make both characters more likable in this film. Anyway, I was talking about regrets. We also have the Christoph character, who in some ways regrets his life choices, which has led him to now be dying from this disease. And the way he deals with it is to not accept it and to find ways to trick destiny so that he doesn't have to actually die. And then the blind man in the movie says that he killed someone when he was younger, an innocent man. And so because of that, he has tried to live a life making amends, trying to be a good, kind person. And the creature obviously benefits greatly from this man's kindness. And so he is an example of someone who deals with his regret by accepting it, not denying it, not fighting it, not trying to trick it out of happening. And he has come to a place of peace in his attempt to try to make things right. And then when it comes to book versus movie, so it's interesting because, I mean, we still get some of the same themes, you know, the folly of pride and man trying to be God and the dangers of seeking knowledge and power above all else. And then a lot of the plot details are the same, you know, like Elizabeth dies in both, and yet how she dies is very different. And so there's things where it's like, oh, I mean, that event happens in both, and yet how it comes about is very different. So the details have been changed. But I think the biggest detail I'm not crazy about is how they made both Victor and the creature more likable. And so on one hand, they're trying to showcase how Victor is a monster, and yet on the other hand, they're also providing him with absolution and giving him a good ending, whereas he is humbled and realizes what he has done wrong and wants to make things right and ends on such a good note with the creature. And then the creature too is far more likable. He doesn't kill any children or innocent women like he does in the book. And so even though they're either unlikable or we see them do horrible things in the book, I missed seeing that in the movie. And instead he tried to make both of them a bit more likable, and I just wasn't a fan of that, I guess. And Victor, coming from such a great family in the book, really did make him seem like just this rich, spoiled guy who's used to getting his way, and so he quickly abandons the creature and doesn't even make an attempt to take responsibility when it comes to life. And again, I like stories of familial cycles we get stuck in. And Frankenstein, he finds himself becoming exactly like his father, who he did not like. And so while I like stories of that nature, I guess I have mixed feelings about that being the story within Frankenstein. Maybe as time goes on, I'll warm up to it, but yeah, you know, it's one interpretation. And while I loved the first scene between Elizabeth and the creature, that's another change I'm iffy on still, is her being in love with him. Yeah, let me know what you think of that. Again, it's a choice I have mixed feelings on. But again, there's a lot to love in this movie. The sets, the costume, the performances are all amazing. And again, I do like seeing someone else's new interpretation of this story because it's been adapted so many times. And so I like seeing what someone else does with it. And Guillermo del Toro is known for making movies about monsters. Nightmare Alley being an exception, which I have covered. That was an early book versus movie video I did where I was talking to the camera, and that was one of the early ones that did well. So I have fond memories of that. Plus the movie is just so fantastic. Anyway, so because he's known for monsters, it's fitting that he's adapting Frankenstein. But yeah, when it comes to book versus movie, I would say that the book wins, and it's hard to compete with the book, right? Because it's just so become bigger than itself in many ways. But competition aside, I do think the two of these make a good pairing. And so I would recommend this. And yeah, that wraps it up for my book versus movie video for Frankenstein. I hope you enjoyed this. Don't forget to share your thoughts down below in the comments. Subscribe if you have not already. And I will see you next time. Bye.